Now, folks, let's ask ourselves, is China planning on war? Please welcome American columnist, author, lawyer, and CPAC board member, Gordon Chang.
Hello, CPAC. Hello, Aussie mates. The flame of freedom burns bright in this room. Today, I stand here with you as an American by birth, as Chinese and Scottish by descent, but most important, as a fellow freedom fighter. But freedom is under attack. Freedom is under attack by its most powerful enemy, the People's Republic of China. We start our discussion on the 22nd of March, when Xi Jinping was bidding farewell to Vladimir Putin in Moscow after their 40th in-person meeting. That's when the Chinese leader said this, quote, "Change is coming that hasn't happened in 100 years, and we," remember, he's talking to Vladimir Putin, "and we are driving this change together." What do these words mean? First of all, Xi Jinping is telling us that he thinks he's already boss of the world. And he's also saying that all other countries are vassals to the Grand Chinese Court. China's regime believes it has the right to rule the world, the entire world. And the regime also believes, and get this, the regime also believes it has the right to rule the near parts of the solar system. Now, I know that sounds ludicrous, but no, I'm not exaggerating. Xi Jinping is working to impose China's imperial-era system, where Chinese emperors believed that they not only had the right to rule what they called Tianxia, or all under heaven, but that heaven actually compelled them to rule the world. So Xi Jinping is not competing with us in the existing international system, which, by the way, has been in place since 1648. He's not competing with us in that system. He's not even trying to adjust that system so it's more to China's liking. He's trying to overthrow it altogether. And that means China, once again, is revolutionary. That's planet Earth. What about the rest of the solar system? Beginning in 2017, Chinese officials started to talk about the Moon and Mars as sovereign Chinese territory. That's right, a part of the People's Republic of China. And that means they consider those near heavenly bodies to be like the South China Sea, theirs and theirs alone. And that also means that they will try to exclude others from going there if they get the ability to do so. We don't need to speculate about that because that's what they tell us. And by the way, Beijing announced the name of its Mars rover in April 2021. And Beijing told us, well, the name of the rover is Zhurong because Zhurong is the god of fire. Mars, fire, makes a lot of sense. What Beijing didn't tell you, though, was that Zhurong is also the god of the South China Sea and the god of war. God of war? Is Xi Jinping bold enough to plunge the world into war? Well, for one thing, he can't stop talking about it. In March of this year, at the National People's Congress meeting, he repeated his now favorite phrase, dare to fight. That message has been filtering down through the ranks because in the following month, the Eastern Theater Command of the People's Liberation Army, after completing these provocative sea and air exercises around Taiwan, announced that it was, quote, ready to fight. And then, last month, Xi Jinping, dressed up in military green, he went to the Eastern Theater Command, which is the command that will lead the invasion of Taiwan, and he gave another one of his let's go out and invade somebody speeches. But Xi Jinping's regime is doing more than just talking. His regime is engaged in the fastest military buildup since the end of the Second World War. It's trying to sanction-proof itself. It's stockpiling grain and other commodities. It's surveying other countries for nuclear weapon strikes. And it is mobilizing China's civilians for war. Yes, China's civilians are now being mobilized for battle. Last July, a Chinese entrepreneur making medical products for the civilian sector told me that Communist Party officials visited him and demanded that he convert his factories inside China to start making products for the Chinese military. Communist Party officials have been going to other private owners with similar demands. And in fact, this entrepreneur told me that the Communist Party is now running factories once owned by private owners because those owners did not want to stick around for Xi Jinping's war. But it's worse than that. We're hearing about disturbing developments inside the People's Liberation Army. So for instance, inside the Rocket Force, which commands almost all of China's nuclear weapons, there's turmoil. It's reported that the deputy commander of the Rocket Force on July 6 took his own life. Also, we are hearing reports that the Communist Party is Cultural Revolution style, purging the military of officers who don't want to go to war. In February, Liu Yaozhou, a former Air Force general, was actually given a death sentence because he was opposed to fighting Taiwan. Just a couple weeks ago, we heard from Xi Jinping and others that there's now a purge in the Rocket Force. The top two commanders have been gotten rid of with all their deputies. This is unprecedented. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is ominous because China's leader is now making sure that the officers of the Rocket Force will launch their nuclear weapons if Xi gives the command. Well, Xi Jinping is thinking of incinerating cities in Taiwan, Japan, the United States, but also a country called Australia. In September 2021, the Chinese threatened to incinerate Canberra because you guys had the temerity to have an agreement with the UK and the US about nuclear-powered submarines. That's the AUKUS deal. But China is doing more than just issuing words. It is now quadrupling the number of warheads it has. So it no longer wants what's called a minimal deterrent to prevent others from attacking China. It now wants a war-fighting capability. And that means it's thinking of launching nukes first. We know this regime is not bound by any rules, so we've got to worry about what they're going to do with their most destructive weapons. We know these guys are not bound by rules because on May 26th of last year, a Chinese fighter intercepted a Royal Australian Air Force P-8 reconnaissance plane in international airspace over the South China Sea. And then that Chinese fighter did something that has never been attempted before in history. That fighter released chaff and flares as it crossed the nose of the Australian P-8. Some of that chaff, which is essentially aluminum foil meant to confuse radar, some of that chaff was actually ingested into one of the two engines of the Australian plane. That put the crew at risk. Fortunately, the pilots were able to get back to base, but this was an act of war. Now, we talk about war, so does Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger on June 7th gave an interview to Bloomberg in which he said that war over Taiwan with China was quote unquote probable. Well, it's probable for many reasons, but one of them is now Xi Jinping actually has the incentives to go to war. He has the incentives to go to war because China is in crisis. There are continuing debt defaults by big property companies, plunging property prices, a tumbling economy, worsening food shortages, a deteriorating environment, and failing local governments. Xi Jinping knows he's being blamed for creating these crises, so he needs a foreign enemy to distract the Chinese people from his obvious policy mistakes. And now he thinks he can do anything he wants. And he is arrogant as all get out. In 2020, Global Times, semi-official publication of the Communist Party, actually told your Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, to kneel before China and to slap his own face. You as a country cannot deal with a Chinese regime that thinks that way. So what do? What do we as free societies do? Well, the first thing that we have to do, at the top of the order, is we have to deter China. And no place is deterrence more important than Taiwan. Why should we defend Taiwan? Well, there are many reasons, but the most important is that it is a free society. China is attacking democracies. We all know that. But it's also attacking the concept of democracy. And we cannot allow China to annex any democracy, especially one as important as Taiwan. So we must do something that is considered to be drastic. We must publicly declare that we will defend Taiwan, because by doing that, Xi Jinping knows that he can't attack Taiwan, but also he knows that we are willing to defend our own societies. So, the Chinese leader says we no longer deter him. We need to take him at his words. If we allow Xi Jinping to take over Taiwan, we know what's going to happen next. Next, he's going to come after Australia, he's going to come after the United States, he's going to go after everyone. After all, he thinks he's the world's only legitimate ruler. So there's something else that we must do. We must cut off the blood supply to those who mean us harm. And specifically, that means we need to cut trade, investment, and technology cooperation. Now, I know for a lot of Australians that sounds extreme, but we shouldn't be enriching a hostile state that means us harm. And we can call it de-risking, we can call it decoupling, but we've got to defend ourselves. Now, I know that many in the Australian business community are thinking, oh, this is extreme. But we got to remember that when China invades Taiwan or some other country, Australia is not going to be selling anything to the Chinese. And that means the time to diversify is now. The other reason is that the Chinese economy is falling apart, and it's falling apart fast. So these guys in Beijing, they're just not going to be buying that much from you in any event. Now, I'm sure you've heard the advice that when you look for a job, the best thing is to already have a job. Well, it means when you're looking for a customer, it's best to already have customers. And now is the time for Australia to take actions to defend itself by looking for alternate customers. Remember, this is not up to us. China is driving events, and we've now got to defend our societies and our economies. And there's one thing else that we must do, the third thing. We must defend our free societies by getting the Chinese regime out of them. China uses every point of contact to undermine free countries. And that means something as innocuous looking as a Confucius Institute on your college campuses. That's a dagger that is pointed to the heart of Australian democracy. You can't have just a little bit of contact with the Chinese regime. Why is that true? Because that insecure regime is worried about the inspirational impact of your values and your form of governance on an already unhappy Chinese people. The Chinese regime will not rest until it has destroyed every democracy in the world. And there's nothing we can do, nothing Australia can do, nothing the United States can do, nothing any other free society can do about this. That's just the nature of the Communist Party. We Americans, we are blessed to have you as our ally. You're our ally in so many important ways. You're part of the Quad, for instance. That's the grouping of Australia, Japan, India, and the United States. And that grouping is telling us the world is dividing into camps. This is therefore a fight between freedom and oppression. This is a fight between democracy and tyranny. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a fight between good and evil. But my standing here today fills me with optimism. I'm filled with optimism because of your fighting spirit, because of your inspirational impact, not only on the Chinese people, but also the rest of the world. Freedom at this critical moment needs defenders, it needs warriors, and that means it needs warriors like you. Now, nobody ever said that defending freedom is easy. So, for all of your ambition, for all that you have done, and most important, for all that you will do, I admire you, I support you, I salute you. Thank God for Australia being in the fight. Thank you.
Put your hands together for Gordon Chang.